I believed for the longest time before we had our daughter, that she was there waiting for us, that our little baby spirit just needed us to show her that we were ready and that she would come. And for me, that was a big part of my fertility journey. It was a really big part of letting go of the control over what happened, of just letting what is be, of knowing that I was really ready, but maybe that my husband wasn't super ready, and that I had to just trust and wait, and that she would decide when it was time. And interestingly enough, lo and behold, the minute I kind of relinquished control and I said, okay, what will be, will be. I'm going to stop pushing this. I'm going to stop trying so hard. About 2 months later, we got pregnant. So I think there is, if you believe in something larger than what we can see in front of our eyes, I think there is value and merit to letting go and relinquishing control and trying to connect to that future little human that's out there waiting for you, and telling them that it's okay and it's safe, and you're ready, or if you're not ready, you will be ready when they arrive, whatever that may be. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of What We Tell Our Daughters. Today, we are going to be talking about fertility awareness, and not so much the fertility awareness method of tracking your cycle, but more about really optimizing your body for having a baby, for conception, for pregnancy. So, this is something that is really close to home for me because it took us almost 2 years of trying to have our daughter, and many deep dives into what was going on and why that was happening. And that's a story for a different day. But ultimately, I learned so much in this process of research for myself. And I have since found and known so many women who have gone down the path of IVF, for example, and still struggled to get pregnant. And so everything we're going to talk about today is relevant, whether you want to get pregnant naturally, whether you want to go through the IVF process. You can do all of this along with IVF as well, and just understanding your body at a deeper level, because this is really helpful too if you're someone who wants to avoid getting pregnant. This will help you understand what are the actual parts of your cycle where you can get pregnant. And then you'll know when you are ready exactly how to optimize it, exactly how to turn that key, so to say. So let's get started. The first thing I want to share with you today is just what does a fertile cycle look like? So we know that in general, women should have a menstrual cycle about every month. Does that mean that every menstrual cycle is actually a fertile cycle, one where you can get pregnant? No. In fact, it's very common to go through life and have some cycles where you're ovulating and some where you may not, maybe because of life stress or lack of nutrients, things like that. So your body is responding to its environment and it's saying, this month is not the month to have a baby, right? That's very normal. It's okay that you don't ovulate every single month. It's great when you do, because that means that your body believes that it's in a safe place to have a baby. And when we're in a safe place to have a baby, I think we can extrapolate that to say, well, we're doing well in terms of our health, in terms of taking care of our mental, spiritual, physical, emotional health, all of those pieces. So I'm going to share my screen for those of you that are watching, and for those of you that are listening, I will explain. But I want to talk about what a fertile menstrual cycle looks like when you're ovulating. So this first half of your cycle, we have your period. That's when you're actually shedding your uterine lining. The cycle's kind of restarting. It's like, okay, we didn't have a baby this month. Let's shed everything and get started. The first day of your period is what we call day one of your menstrual cycle. So if you can see in this image, there's actually an image of your endometrium, which is the lining of the uterus. And you can see that it's a lot thicker here on day one, because that's when your body's starting to shed that lining. And then over the next few days, it's going to go down to virtually nothing as you finish out your period. And then it's going to kind of restart. So the first, we call that the menstrual phase, when you're actually having your period and you're bleeding. Then we have what we call the follicular phase. That is the time from when your menstruation ends, basically, or even kind of the first day of menstruation until you ovulate. That's where the follicle is developing, and the follicle is what releases the egg. So that generally takes around 14 days for people, for that follicle to mature and then the egg to drop. Now, if you have a particularly stressful life that month, your follicle might mature and mature, but it might decide, you know what, we're not going to drop that egg this month because there's too much going on. It's not safe. Or it might actually delay it a bit longer. So that's something that can happen, if you notice like you have a big event 1 month and your period or the time between your menstruation is longer, say like 30 or 40 days instead of your usual 27 days. Sometimes, and you still feel like you ovulated that month, usually what's happening is that first part of the cycle is getting lengthened. Your body's waiting to drop that egg until it feels like it's a safe time. So that's what we call the first part. And if you can kind of see behind the endometrium here, we also have these hormone fluctuations. So we have estrogen, which is pretty low around the middle of that first half of your cycle. And progesterone is also pretty low, as well as luteinizing hormone. It's harder to see on this graph, but basically, in that first part, all of your hormones are going to be lower. So, for a woman, that's the time in our menstrual cycle where we might feel the most kind of equivalent to what a man feels on a daily basis. We might have a bit more like gust and energy for life. We probably don't have as many like energy rises and falls. And you might be a little bit more consistent for multiple days in a row instead of like radically swinging emotion wise or energy wise day to day. Then you can see before we have ovulation, we have this rise. We have this big rise in estrogen and this big rise in luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone is actually what tells the body to release the egg. And when that happens, we have ovulation. Now, there's much more to ovulation than just an egg dropping. When you're around your ovulation, you're probably going to notice a few other things, assuming that you're not on any other kind of medication or something that might change the way you're feeling daily. You're probably going to have a higher libido. You'll probably notice that you have more kind of egg white cervical fluid. So if you look down and you kind of feel the secretions, the vaginal secretions, they're going to be more sticky and almost like a stringy, literally like an egg white, because the purpose of that is to actually create a ladder for the sperm to climb up, to swim up quickly and get to the egg. In the first half and the second half of your cycle, you're going to probably notice that your vaginal secretions are like a lot thicker. Maybe they're even white or creamy instead of clear. That is not optimal to have a sperm get to the egg. So that's another sign that you can kind of track in your body to see when you might be fertile. This is really helpful if you're someone who doesn't want to get pregnant and you're trying to avoid pregnancy. You know, when you start to have that kind of egg white secretion, okay, now I'm probably fertile. I want to make sure I'm having some sort of protection when I have sex. Or on the other side, if you really want to get pregnant, this is a great time to have sex. So once the egg drops, once we have ovulation, the egg only lives for 24 to 48 hours. So there's a short window once ovulation happens where you can still get pregnant, where that egg can still be fertilized by a sperm. On the front side of your menstrual cycle, sperm can actually live for quite a while in these kind of crevices in your uterus and your vaginal, not your uterus, but your vaginal tract. So up to like 7 days before you ovulate, sperm can actually live and wait until you ovulate so that they can go get to the egg. So it's much more important to be thoughtful about when you're having sex in that first half of your menstrual cycle if you're trying to avoid pregnancy or if you want to get pregnant, because once the egg is gone and dead, you can no longer get pregnant. So usually a few days after you ovulate is kind of what we would consider a safe time to have air quotes, unprotected sex, not using some sort of birth control method, because there's no longer an egg. Occasionally, though, women do drop more than one egg in a cycle. That has happened before. So you do have to be careful and you do have to be thoughtful. But if you're trying to get pregnant around that middle part of your cycle, when you notice that you maybe have a spike in energy, your libido's higher, you have that egg white fluid, those are all really good signs that you are fertile. And it's a great time to try to have a baby to fertilize an egg, so to say. Well, not so to say, literally to fertilize an egg. Now, if you look at the second half of your cycle here, we have this rise in progesterone. So estrogen will actually stay a bit lower, but progesterone goes up quite a lot in that second half of your cycle. We call this the luteal phase. This is after luteinizing hormone has triggered the ovulation. Now, what causes that rise in progesterone is within the ovary, something called the corpus luteum is going to start to grow. And this is actually an organ that only grows in this part of your cycle. And it is meant to create optimal conditions for a baby to start to grow. So if the egg was fertilized and it implants, it's going to raise progesterone, it's going to secrete estradiol. Um, Oestradiol, specifically the type of estrogen that we get during pregnancy. And so if you don't ovulate in a cycle and you don't get you will not get the same rise in progesterone. So the way that you feel in the second half of your cycle in an ovulatory cycle versus a non-ovulatory cycle is actually quite different. In a non-ovulatory cycle, you might notice that you have more symptoms of estrogen, of kind of over an excess of estrogen in your body. You might feel more painful breasts, more bloating. You might have slightly more painful period. You may have more PMS before your period. All of those kind of go hand in hand with a cycle where you don't ovulate because you don't have this progesterone being secreted by the corpus luteum to help balance out your estrogen. And if you've listened to any other of my other podcasts, you know that we talk about this quite a lot, this kind of balance of hormones and why this is so important for our body. So, as we're looking at this graph, you can get a little bit of an overview of what a ovulatory menstrual cycle looks like. And it is a fine dance and a fine balance. There is a lot going on here. And this is for a good reason. Your body has many checks and balances in place to make sure that if we're going to grow a human, if we're going to commit 9, almost 10 months of our life to growing a human, we need to make sure that conditions are optimal and not just okay. So if you're trying to get pregnant, it's really important to understand this because it's not like you can just have sex at any point in your menstrual cycle and get pregnant like they used to tell us in sex ed when we were 14 years old. There is usually a very small window. And once that egg has died and hasn't been fertilized, then it's really not possible to get pregnant anymore. So that's kind of the first part of I wanted to talk about today, which is just an overview of our menstrual cycle, really understanding what does it look like when we are fertile. And we talked a little bit about the symptoms that are going to show that you're fertile as well. If you use any type of temperature tracker, that's another way that we can look to see, are you ovulating? Are you fertile in that window? Because the other thing that happens is when progesterone begins to rise from that corpus luteum, it actually causes an increase in your basal body temperature. So if you track your basal body temperature, which has to be done like first thing in the morning before you start moving around, or with something like an Aura ring, which I'm wearing right now because that tracks your temperature overnight when you're not like exercising. And you're going to see that there's usually a little bump up in your temperature after you ovulate because that's that progesterone starting to rise that's causing that increase in your basal metabolism basically, and in turn your basal body temperature. We talked about when to have sex. So timing it maybe the week before, like if you are up for it, have sex every single day that week before leading up to ovulation and then through ovulation and maybe the day after. That's going to give you the best chances. Once that egg has died, your chances are pretty much over. So usually once you see a rise in your basal body temperature, if you're temperature tracking, um, your chances of getting pregnant are much slimmer because you've already ovulated. And remember that egg only lives for 24 to 48 hours. Now, I want to talk about a few other things. So we're going to talk about nutrition and what to eat and some supplements as well. But I want to talk about something that is kind of more of a old wives' tale, but I think it's relevant and interesting to talk about because when we were trying to have my daughter, well, we didn't care what sex the baby was, but my mom asked me, "Do you want to have a boy or a girl?" And I think maybe I said I wanted to have a girl because I did want to have a girl, but did I really care? No. So I did do a little like Google research of how to have a girl versus how to have a boy. And there was a researcher, oh gosh, I don't even remember when, but a while back, who thought that if you had sex for the week leading up to your period to your ovulation, and it was a longer time between your last time of having sex and when you ovulated, you were more likely to have a girl because that he believed that the sperm that carry the X chromosome, the female chromosome, live longer and they're a bit heavier. So they're a little bit slower to swim. They might actually live in those crevices in the vaginal tract for longer. If you wanted to have a boy, you should try to time sex right with ovulation because that's when they're going to be the fastest. Those little boy swimmers are a little bit lighter, apparently. I don't think that research exists anymore, or it's been disproven, and they can reach the egg faster. So we now know that none of that is true. You really can't control whether or not you have a boy or a girl through when you time your sex or how you do it. And the reason I think this is helpful to talk about is there's enough stress, I think, for many people that go into having a baby, especially in this day and age, because we know that fertility is dropping rapidly. So you don't need to add an extra factor there. Don't even try to time it perfectly for this one sex that you think you want to have, because in my opinion, the truth is your baby's already chosen you. So you have no choice about whether or not it's a boy or a girl. Whatever little spirit is out there waiting for you is the one that you're going to get. And, uh, and it's going to be the one that's already chosen you as its parents long before this moment happened. That's what I believe. You can believe whatever you like. And I think believe whatever you find the most helpful. As a side note here, my husband grew up Catholic. And so we have an ongoing, mm, not a source of contention, but just a difference in our belief systems where like if there isn't science to prove something, it's a no for him. There's absolutely no way that that's possible. Blind belief, believing in something without scientific evidence is a hard no because of course growing up in the Catholic Church there's so much that you get somewhat indoctrinated into and there's so much fear you feel on the other side of it, I think quite slighted that you've been lied to, basically. So I believed for the longest time before we had our daughter, that she was there waiting for us, that our little baby spirit just needed us to show her that we were ready and that she would come. And for me, that was a big part of my fertility journey. It was a really big part of letting go of the control over what happened, of just letting what is be, of knowing that I was really ready, but maybe that my husband wasn't super ready and that I had to just trust and wait and that she would decide when it was time. And interestingly enough, lo and behold, the minute I kind of relinquished control and I said, okay, what will be, will be. I'm going to stop pushing this. I'm going to stop trying so hard. About 2 months later, we got pregnant. So I think there is, if you believe in something larger than what we can see in front of our eyes, I think there is value and merit to letting go and relinquishing control and trying to connect to that future little human that's out there waiting for you and telling them that it's okay and it's safe and you're ready, or if you're not ready, you will be ready when they arrive, whatever that may be. I think this is something that if I were ever to create a fertility program, I would include because it's more than just science. We know now that there is quantum physics and energetics behind so much of what Eastern medicine and Chinese medicine has believed for so long. And whether or not we completely understand it or we completely know it's true or we have all of the research, I can tell you that I feel like it made a difference for me to talk to her, to tell her that, the veil is thin, the curtain is thin, and I know you're there, and I know that you'll be here when you're ready. And I just want you to know that I am ready. And also that we trust you. We trust you to choose when it is your time. So that's my little side rant on more of the spiritual side of fertility. But back to the science. So let's talk about just it's not really worth trying to control the timing of your sex. I think it's much better to just relinquish control. Like I said, just trust that when it's time, it will happen. You can only do what you can do. We can work within the bounds of science and what we know our bodies can do. And the rest is just kind of up to all the work we've done and all the trust we have in our bodies to do what needs to happen. So alongside that work that we need to do to get ready for being pregnant, there's two things that we can talk about, and one is nutrition. And when I think about nutrition for pregnancy, there's definitely a factor of eating enough. Like it's very hard to get pregnant if we're not eating enough. And so we see often in functional medicine, women will have a hard time getting pregnant and their thyroid hormones, maybe their TSH comes back normal, but their T3 and their T4 are off. So, what can look normal on a thyroid lab or can look normal for a Western medicine range is not normal on a functional range. And that small deviation can actually have a huge effect on your fertility. And I think a big factor that goes into this is actually whether or not women are eating enough for their body, if they're over exercising, if they're overstressed, if they're sleeping enough. So, all of those lifestyle factors are super important when we're thinking about fertility. Then we can also talk about supplements. So, I mean, and nutrition is a deep and wide void, and there's so much that can be said there. But I think, as a good rule of thumb, fat, carb, and protein with every meal. Get the rainbow every day. If you're getting more and more of a rainbow, then your body's going to have all of those antioxidants, all of the nutrients it needs to grow a human. I mean, consider how much energy and work it is to grow a human body. We need to be nutritionally fortified, basically. And then when we're talking about supplements, again, supplements can be very helpful if we're dealing with other health situations that we want to keep under control with supplements. But there's a few that are just generally known to be very helpful for female fertility in particular. So we know that we should be taking a prenatal vitamin long before we actually get pregnant because our body needs that store of nutrients in order to grow and to build. The other two things that are really great are actually both antioxidants, and one is melatonin. There's now some new research that shows melatonin can extend the life of female fertility. It can improve egg quality. And it doesn't have to be at a high amount, 1 to 3 milligrams. 3 milligrams would be pretty high, but you could do I take 1 milligram every night. And then also CoQ10, which is also an antioxidant, is shown to really support that egg quality. So as we get past the age of 35, which we would consider very stillily, in my opinion, an advanced age for motherhood, we need to be more thoughtful about our egg quality because, yes, we still have eggs. Yes, we're still ovulating, but we want to make sure that they're really high quality and that all of that DNA is still maintained at its healthiest initial state. So, those are my three kind of top recommendations. There are many others too that we could go down a rabbit hole into. I really love organ meat supplements. If you don't eat organ meats, I don't love organ meats, so I do take organ meat supplements. And when I was anemic in my pregnancy, my doctor did recommend that I take an iron supplement, and I actually just added extra organ meat capsules into my diet, and it helped immediately with my anemia. So that's another really great one that you can add in there, especially if you know you have a history of being anemic. Finally, the last kind of topic that I think we want to talk about with fertility, and this is kind of where I am right now in this process, is I had my daughter 17 months ago. And while my mind desperately wants another baby, I know that the research shows your baby is more likely to be healthy. So, have all these, when we do nutrient studies on babies when they're born and just general health outcomes, they have better health outcomes when you wait 2 years between pregnancies, which makes sense. When you're growing a human, it's extremely nutritionally heavy. So, giving your body 2 years of recovery to help replenish that nutrient supply is really, really important, especially if you're breastfeeding. So, I'm still breastfeeding my daughter, which means that even though I'm trying to refill the tank, there's a lot still going out. So, it's going to take some time for me to get back to that place of being, well, hopefully someday I'll get back to the same nutritionally fortified place I was when I was 29 and I got pregnant with her the first time. So, all of those are factors to think about when you're thinking about fertility. And if you're someone who wants to get pregnant, um, what I've just described is essentially a functional medicine approach to fertility and optimizing fertility. And there's a lot we can do. We can do hormone testing. We can dig deep into other root causes if there are hormones that are out of balance, or like, as I mentioned, maybe your thyroid is out of balance, or sometimes even gut health can affect whether or not we're able to get pregnant because of um, the overgrowth of bacteria sometimes can play a role. And all of this is really important for us to consider. And it's also cheaper than doing IVF. So I'm not inherently against IVF. If that feels like the right choice for you, then by all means go for it. But you can do all of these things that we just discussed simultaneously with IVF. Or if you feel like you have time, 3 to 6 months to commit to really diving into this, you could potentially avoid IVF altogether by doing some of these things and by digging a little bit deeper into what is it that's affecting my fertility. Make sure that your partners get tested for their fertility because that actually was finally the factor for us that I truly deeply believed it was all me, that there was something that I needed to deal with that was causing us to not get pregnant. And when we finally tested my husband's sperm, that was actually the biggest kind of roadblock for us. So all that is to say, there's a lot we can do. There's a lot of tools, and they're not hard tools. These are not super heavy lifts. We don't have to have surgery. We don't have to inject ourselves every day. We don't even have to take medications every day. Yes, it's great if you can get some supplements in, but these are much lighter supplements, and they're going to be really nourishing for your body instead of potentially um, harder for your body to handle. So, that's my little soapbox today on fertility and understanding your menstrual cycle for fertility, how to optimize it, how to not get pregnant if that's your goal right now, and so that you know when you are ready exactly how to get started and what to do. So I hope this was helpful, and I will see you in the next one.